to dance afterwards, said Franz, carefully tipping the diminutive decanter. But what did she care about dancing? She longed to remain in this oval lake of light, basking in the certainty that it would be thus again tomorrow and next night, and thus to be the end of their lives. My dining room, my earring, my silver, my Franz. Suddenly she snatched at her left wrist to turn the tiny face of her watch, which always contrived to slip around to where a blue vein trifurcated. More than an hour late. Something must have happened. Ring the bell, please. There, it's hanging above you. It irked him that her husband's absence alarmed her. What in heck did it matter if you were late? All the better. She simply had no right to be alarmed. Why must I ring? He said, thrusting his hands into his coat pockets. Martha opened her eyes wide. I think I asked you to press that bell button. After the long ray of her gaze, he gave way as usual and rang the bell. If you have had all you want, we can move to the drawing room. We have some grapes, though. Here, this bunch. He started upon the grapes, which were large and expensive-looking, but not half as good as the vulgar crams of his native town. The shadow of the electric bell, swinging on its cord, moved like a ghostly pendulum across the tablecloth. Frida came in, looking pale and dazed. Martha asked, My husband did not call while I was out, did he? Frida froze still for an instant, then clutched at her temples. Goodness, she said, Herr Director did call about 8. Said he was just leaving for home and to go ahead with supper. I'm so sorry. An abscessed tooth, said Martha, should not have made you insane. I'm so sorry, repeated the maid helplessly. Completely insane, said Martha. Frida remained silent and, blinking with suspicious frequency, started gathering up the used plates. Later, snapped Martha. The maid hurried out, no longer containing her sobs. Incredible female, muttered Martha angrily, leaning her elbows on the table and propping her chin between her joined fists. Didn't she see us sitting down to table? Didn't she bring the omelet herself? Wait a minute, I didn't realize that she actually served it. Martha's glittering finger pointed. Read once more, please. Franz obediently raised his hand. No, don't bother, said Martha. I'll have a good talk with her before she goes to bed. An extraordinary agitation had seized Martha. Unless my watch and that clock are as dotty as she. It is now 11:30. Uncle is certainly taking his time driving home. Something must have delayed him, Franz responded glumly. He was deeply hurt by her agitation. She turned off the dining room lights. They went into the parlor. Martha picked up her telephone receiver, listened, then slammed it down again. It's in order, she said. I simply don't understand. Maybe I ought to ring up with his hands clasped behind his back. Franz was walking to and fro about the room. The poor fellow's eyes smarted. He wondered if he had not better leave, slamming the door after him. Martha flipped through her telephone index. It fits neatly under the phone, holds 500 entries, and found the home number of her husband's secretary. Sarah Reich had just fallen asleep, and now the first pill of the night was thrown away. That's certainly odd, she replied. I saw him leave myself. Yes, in the Icarus. It was, wait a minute, yes, about 8, and it is now only midnight, almost midnight. Thanks, said Martha, and the cradle of the telephone jangled. She went to the window and drew aside the blue curtain. The night was clear. The day before it had started to thaw, and then freeze had set in again. That morning a cripple walking in front of her had slipped on the bare ice. It was frightfully funny to see his wooden stump erect while he sprawled on his stupid back, without opening her mouth. Martha broke into convulsive laughter. Franz thought she had uttered a sob and went to her side in confusion. She clutched his shoulder, her cheek rubbed against his face. Careful, my glasses, mumbled Franz, not for the first time in the course of the last weeks. Start the music, she cried, letting him go. We'll dance, we'll enjoy ourselves, and don't you dare be frightened. I'll speak to you as tenderly as I wish, any time I feel like it. Do you hear? Franz reverentially turned the crank of the large lacquered box that must have cost more money than all the records it would ever consume. When he looked up, Martha was sitting on the sofa, gazing at him with a strange, morose expression. I thought you'd choose a record meanwhile, said Franz. She turned away. No, I definitely don't feel like dancing. Franz heaved a sigh. He had seen in her difficult moods, but this was something special. He sat down beside her on the sofa. A door shut somewhere. Frida going to bed? Still listening intently, he kissed Martha, first on the hair, then on the lips. Her teeth were chattering. Give me my shawl, she said. He picked up the pink woolly shawl from the corner cassock. She consulted her watch. Franz got up abruptly. I'm going home, he said. You are what? Going home. I have to get up much earlier than old secretaries and fat maids. You shall stay, said Martha. He considered her, reflecting vaguely that there was something behind all this, but what? You know what I have just remembered, Martha said suddenly as he picked up had his trouser knees and sat down. "I remember that rude policeman writing his report. Give me your little red book and a pencil. There," she continued, getting up and standing straight and stiff. That's how he held the notebook in front of him, trembled with fury, and wrote in it. "What policeman? What are you talking about?" "That's right, you weren't there. I've got used to including you retroactively, if you know what I mean, in everything that ever happened." "Stop it," said Franz. "You frighten me." "I don't care if you're frightened. In fact, I don't care if— Forgive me, darling. I'm talking nonsense. I'm just over-eager, I suppose." She settled down on the sofa again, with the address book in her lap. She doodled some lines on a page, then wrote her family name and slowly crossed it out. She looked at him askance, once more wrote Dreyer in large characters, slitted her eyes, and started blacking it out. The pencil tip broke. She tossed the book and pencil to him and got up. The clock talked rather than ticked. The talk clicked and clocked. Martha stood before him as if trying to hypnotize him, to transfer some simple thought to his young, dull brain. The front door banged in the unbearable silence, and Tom's rejoicing voice burst forth. "My spells don't work," said Martha, and a bizarre spasm distorted her beautiful face. Dreyer came in not quite as jauntily as he usually did, nor did he greet Franz with a joke. "Why so late?" asked Martha. "Why didn't you call?" "Just happened that way, my love, just happened that way." He attempted to smile, but nothing came of it. He stared at his nephew's clothes. The pants were much too narrow, the lapels too shiny. "Well, it's time for me to be going," cried Franz hoarsely. He was in such a silly panic that he could not remember afterwards how he said goodbye or put on his overcoat or reached the street. "You're not telling the truth," said Martha. "Something has happened. What is it?" "A boring story, my love. A man has been killed." "Jokes again, always jokes," moaned Martha. "Not this time," Dreyer said quietly. "We smashed into a streetcar at full speed. Number 73. I only lost my hat and took a healthy bump against something. In these cases, it's always the driver who comes off worst. The ambulance people are angels. We took him to the hospital while he was still alive. Died there. Real angels. Better don't ask for details." In the dining room, they sat facing each other across the table. Dreyer was finishing what remained of the cold chicken. Martha, her face pale and glossy with drops of sweat over her lip and the tiny black hairs showed, stared with her fingers pressed to her temples at the white, intolerably white tablecloth. 7. When the inevitable explosion, somehow sensed as inevitable just before it occurred, was on the point of interrupting and absorbing, although incoherent, conversation with an unshaven Magyar or Basque about treating surgically with buckets of blood a seal's tail to enable the seal to walk upright, Dreyer abruptly returned to the mortality of a winter morning, and with desperate haste, as if he were dealing with an infernal machine, stopped the alarm clock that was about to ring. Martha's bed was already empty. A bad tingle in his left arm connected like an electric buzzer the previous day with the present one. Along the corridor, sobbing loudly, shuffled soft-hearted Frida. With a sigh, he examined the huge violet bruise on his thick shoulder. While lying in the tub, he heard Martha perform in the next room the panting, crunching, flopping exercises that were in fashion that year. He had a quick breakfast, lit a cigar, smiled with pain as he put on his overcoat, and went out. The gardener, who was also the watchman, was standing by the fence, and Dreyer thought it might be well, even at this late date, to solve by means of a direct question the mystery that had preoccupied him for so long. "A calamity, a real calamity," observed the gardener gravely, "and to think that back in his village he has left a comparatively young father and 4 little sisters, a skid on the ice and kaput. He had hoped so much to drive a big truck some day." "Yes," nodded Dreyer, cracked his skull, his rib cage. "A good merry chap," said the gardener with feeling. "And now he is dead." "Listen," began Dreyer, "you did not happen to notice. You see, I have a strong suspicion." He faltered. A trifle, the sense of a verb, stopped him. Instead of asking, "Does he think?" it would have to be, "Did he drink?" This shift of tense caused a wobble in logic. "As I was saying, have you noticed there is something wrong with the latch of the big parlor window? I mean, the catch does not work properly. Anybody could get in from outside." "Finis," he mused, and he sat in a taxi with his hand in a strap. "The end of a life, the end of a joke. I shall sell Icarus without repairing it. She does not want another car, and I think she is right. It's best to wait a while until fate forgets." The reason Martha did not want a car was less metaphysical. It might seem a bit strange and suspicious not to use one's own car to go 2 or 3 times a week in the late afternoon for lessons in rhythmic inclinations and gesticulations for accept these lilies or let us unfold our veils in the wind, and the reason she could not use it was that she would have to bribe her chauffeur to be silent about her real destination. Therefore, she had to resort to other means of transportation, the most varied kind, including even the subway, which brought one very conveniently from any part of the city. And a roundabout route was essential, though it took only 15 minutes to walk the distance to a certain street corner where the rather fantastic house was being slowly built. She casually mentioned to Dreyer that she loved taking a bus or a tram whenever she had the chance because it was a shame not to take advantage of the cheap, exhilaratingly cheap methods of transportation put at one's disposal by a generous city. He said he was a generous citizen who preferred a taxi or a private car. By taking these precautions, Martha believed that nobody would ever guess that she transposed or curtailed or missed altogether those delightful contortions and scattering of invisible flowers in the delightful company of other barefooted ladies in more or less comical tunics. On the day that businessman Dreyer, owner of the dandy department store, and his chauffeur briefly appeared in the city news section of the newspaper, Martha arrived a little earlier than usual. Franz was not yet back from work. She sat down on the couch, took off her hat, slowly removed her gloves. That day her face was particularly pale. She wore her high-neck beige dress with little buttons in front. When Franz's familiar footsteps sounded in the corridor, he entered with abrupt unceremoniousness with which we enter our own room, assuming that it is empty. She did not smile. Franz emitted an exclamation of pleased surprise, and without taking off his hat began to shower Martha's neck and ear with rapid kisses. "You know about it already?" she asked, and her eyes had the strange expression he had hoped never to see again. "You bet," he answered, and getting up from the couch, shed his raincoat and striped scarf. "Everybody was discussing it in the store. They asked me all kinds of questions. I really was scared when he came in looking so grim yesterday. What a dreadful thing." "What's dreadful, Franz?" He was already coatless and colorless and was noisily washing his hands. "Well, all that jagged glass hitting you in the face, that crunch of metal and bones and blood and blackness. I don't know why, but I picture such things so clearly. It makes me want to vomit." "That is just nerves, Franz, nerves. Come here." He sat down close to her, and trying not to notice that she was absorbed in remote, dreary thoughts of her own, softly asked, "No pom-poms today?" She did not hear the sweet euphemism, or did not seem to hear it. "Franz," she said, stroking and restraining his hand, "do you realize what a miracle it was? I had a presentiment yesterday which did not work." "There we go again," he thought. "How long will she bore me with her concern for him?" He turned away and attempted to whistle, but no sound came out, and he remained brooding with puckered lips. "What's the matter with you, Franz? Stop acting like a fool. I closed for repairs today." Another sweet euphemism. She drew him to her by the neck, and he did not yield, but her diamond-like gaze slashed him, and he went all limp and whimpery, the way a child's balloon collapses with a pitiful squeak. Tears of resentment fogged his glasses. He pressed his head to her shoulder. "I can't go on like this," he whined. "Already last night I wondered if your feeling for me was really serious, worrying about that old uncle of mine. It means you care for him. Oh, it's so painful." Martha blinked and understood his mistake. "So that's what it is," she drawled with a laugh. "Oh, you poor dear." She took his head in her hands, looked intently and sternly into his eyes, and then slowly, with her mouth half open, as if she were about to give him a gentle bite, drew close to his face and took possession of his lips. "Shame on you," she said, releasing him slowly. "Shame on you," she repeated with a nod. "I never thought you were that silly. No, just a minute. I want you to understand how silly you are. No, wait. You can't touch me, but I can certainly touch you, and nibble you, and even swallow you whole if I want. Listen," she said, a little while later. After that stunt, quite new to Franz, she had been brought to a satisfactory close. "Listen, Franz, how wonderful it would be if I didn't have to go today or tomorrow, or ever. Of course, we could not live in a tiny room like this." "We would rent a larger, brighter room," said Franz with assurance. Let's dream a little. Larger and much brighter. Maybe even 2 rooms. What do you think? Or perhaps 3? And of course a kitchen. And lots of beautiful knives," said Franz. "Meat cleavers and cheese cutters and a roast pork slicer. But you could not do any cooking. You have such precious nails." "Yes, naturally, we'd have a cook. What did we decide? These 3 rooms? No, 4, said Franz after a moment's thought. Bedroom, drawing room, sitting room, dining room. 4, fine. A regular 4-room apartment with a kitchen, with a bath. And we'll have the bedroom all done in white, won't we? And other rooms blue. And then there will be the reception room with lots and lots of flowers, and an extra room upstairs just in case for guests, say. For a wee little guests, maybe." "What do you mean upstairs?" "Why, of course, it will be a villa." "Ah, I see," nodded Franz. "Let's continue, darling. A detached villa, then, with a pretty entrance hall. We enter, rugs, pictures, silverware, embroidered sheets, right? And a garden, fruit trees, magnolias. Is that so, Franz?" He sighed. "All this will come only in 10 years or more. It will be a long time before I earn sufficiently for you to divorce him. Martha fell silent as if she were not in the room. Franz turned to her with a smile, ready to play on, but the smile faded. She was looking at him with narrowed eyes, biting her lip. 10 years, she said bitterly. You little fool. You really want to wait 10 years? That's how it looks to me, Franz replied. I don't know, maybe if I'm very lucky, but for instance, take Mr. Pifke. He's been with the store right from the start, and that's how you know how many years. But he lives very modestly. He doesn't make more than $450 a month. His wife works, too. They have a tiny apartment full of boxes and things. Thank God you understand, said Martha. You see, sweetheart, one cannot deposit dreams at the bank. They aren't dependable securities, and the dividends they bring are nothing. Then what shall we do? Said frightened Franz. You know I'm ready to marry you immediately. I can't exist without you. Without you I'm like an empty sleeve. But I can't even afford one of those nice new floor mats we sell at the store, let alone carpets. And then, of course, I'd have to look for another job, and I don't know anything, wrinkly his face. I have no experience in anything. That means learning all over again. We'd have to live in a damp, shabby little room, saving on food and clothes. Yes, there would be no longer any uncle to help, said Martha dryly. No uncle at all. The whole idea is unthinkable, said Franz. Absolutely unthinkable, said Martha. Why are you angry with me? He asked for a moment's silence. As if I were responsible or something. It's really not my fault. Well, let's dream on if you want. Only don't get angry. I have 17 suits like Uncle. Want me to describe them for you? In 10 years, she said with a laugh. In 10 years, my dear, men's fashions will have changed substantially. There, you are angry again. Yes, I'm angry, not with you, though, but with fate. You see, Franz, no, you wouldn't understand. I'll understand, said Franz. All right, then, you see, people generally make all kinds of plans, very good plans, but completely fail to consider one possibility. Death. As if no one could ever die. Oh, don't look at me as if I were saying something indecent. She now had exactly the same odd expression as last night when she tried to impersonate a policeman. It's time for me to go, said Martha with a frown. She got up and looked at herself in the mirror. Christmas trees are already sold in the streets, she said, raising her elbows as she put on her hat. I want to buy a tree, a huge, very expensive fir tree, and lots of presents to go under it. Please give me 420 marks. I'm out of pocket. And you're also very nasty, sighed Franz. He accompanied her down the dark stairs. He walked her to the square. The builders had started on the facade of the new cinema. The sidewalk was very slippery. The glare ice glistened under the street lamps. You know something, Treasure, she said when bidding him good-bye at the corner. I might have been in deep mourning today, and very becoming it would have been. And just by chance that I'm not in mourning. Ponder that, my little nephew. Exactly what she wanted happened then. Franz looked at her, opened his mouth, and suddenly burst out laughing. She rocked with laughter, too. A gentleman with a box terrier who was waiting nearby for the dog to make up its mind in regard to the lamp-post glanced at the merry couple with approval and envy. In mourning, said Franz, choking with laughter. She nodded, laughing. In mourning, said Franz, stifling a rich guffaw in the palm of his hand. The man with the fox terrier shook his head and moved on. I adore you, uttered Franz in a weak voice, and for quite a while gazed after her with moist eyes. However, as soon as she turned away to go home, Martha's face again grew stern. Franz, meanwhile, wiped his glasses with his handkerchief and ambled off, continuing to chuckle to himself. Yes, it really was a matter of chance. If only the owner of the car had sat beside the chauffeur. Just supposing he'd gone and sat there. There she would be today, a widow, a rich widow, an adorable mistress, a wonderful wife. How drolly she put it. Yours is honey, his poison. And then again, who needs an elaborate crack-up? After all, car accidents are not necessarily fatal. Much too often gets away with bruises, fracture, lacerations. One mustn't make too complicated demands on chance. Exactly that way, please. Make the brain squirt out. There are other possibilities. Illness, for example. Perhaps he has a bad heart and does not know it. And look at all the influenza people who croak. Then we'd really start living. The store would go on doing business, the money would roll in, but then more likely he'll outlive his wife and make it all the way to the 21st century. Why, there was something in the papers about a Turk who was 150 years old and had still produced children, the filthy old brute. Thus he mused, vaguely and crudely, unaware that his thoughts were spinning along from the push given them by Martha. The thought of marriage had also come from her. Oh, but it was a good thought, if he derived such pleasure from Martha satisfying him twice in 1 hour 3 or 4 times a week. What varied ecstasies would she grant him if she were available 24 hours a day? He employed this method of calculating happiness quite guilelessly, the way a greedy child imagines a country with chocolate cream mud and ice cream snow. In those days, which is a very old and sick man, guilty of worse sins than avunculicide. He remembered with a grim of contempt young Franz was oblivious to the corrosive probity of his pleasant daydreams about drivers dropping dead. He had plunged into a region of delirium, blithely and light-heartedly. His subsequent meetings with Martha appeared to be as natural and tender as all the previous ones, but just as that modest little room, with its unpretentious old furniture and its naively dark corridor, had for master a person, or persons, incurably though not obviously insane, there now lurked in those meetings something strange, a little eerie and shameful at first, but already enthralling, already all-powerful. Whatever Martha said, however charmingly she smiled, Franz sensed an irresistible insinuation in her every word and glance. They were like heirs sitting in a dim-lit parlor, while in the bedroom doomed Plutus pleads with the doctor and curses the priest. They might talk about trifles, about the approach of Christmas, about the intense activity of skis and wools at the Emporium. One might talk about anything, although perhaps a little more soberly than before, for one's hearing is strained, one's eyes have a changeable gleam. A secret impatience allows one no peace as one waits and waits for the grim physician to come out on tiptoe. With an eloquent sigh, and lo, through the crack of the door one glimpses the long back of the cleric, representative of a boundlessly charitable church, in the act of bending over the white bed. Theirs was a pointless vigil. Martha knew perfectly well that he never seemed to have even so much as a toothache or a cold. Therefore it was practically irritating to her when just before the holiday she herself contracted a chill. The poor girl developed a dry cough, a tease and a wheeze in the bronchia, night sweats, and spent the day in a kind of dull trance, dazed by the so-called grippe, heavy-headed and with ears abuzz. When Christmas came she felt no better. That evening, nevertheless, she put on a sheer flame-colored dress, very low cut at the back, and deafened by aspirin, trying to dispel her illness by willpower, supervised the preparation of the punch, the laying of the table, the ruddy, smoky activity of the cook. In the parlor, its silvery crown touching the ceiling, all decked out in flimsy tinsellery, all studded with still unlit red and blue bulbs, a fresh, luxuriant fir tree stood, indifferent to its buffoonish array. In an uncosy nook between the parlor and the entry, a bright and rather bare place, termed for some reason a reception room, where among the wicker furniture grew and bloomed potted plants, cyclamen, 7 dwarf cactuses, a peperomia with painted leaves, and where the tangerine glow of an electric fireplace could not beat the draught from a plate-glass window, Dwyer in evening dress sat reading an English book while waiting for his guests. The scene was laid on the island of Capri. He moved his lips as he read, and he peeked pretty often into a fat dictionary which kept shuttling between his lap and a glass-topped table. Not knowing what to do with herself during this prolonged lull before the first ring, Martha sat down at a little distance from him on a settee, and lifted her foot off the floor, examining from every angle her pointed shoe. The stillness was intolerable. Dwyer accidentally dropped the dictionary, and making his generously starched shirt crackle, retrieved it without taking his eyes off his book. What could she do with that oppression, that tightness in the chest? Coughing alone could not relieve it. There was only one thing that could make the whole world well, the sudden and total disappearance of that self-satisfied, bulky man with the leonine brows and freckled hands. The acuteness of her hatred reached such a pitch of perception that for a moment she had the illusion that his chair was empty, but his cuff-link described a flashing arc as he shut the dictionary, and he said, smiling at her consolingly, "Goodness, what a cold you have! I can hear a veritable orchestra of wheezes turning up in you." "Spare me your metaphors and put your book away," said Martha. "The guests will be here at any moment. And that dictionary, there's nothing more untidy than a dictionary on a chair." "All right, my treasury," he answered in English, and walked away with his books, mentally lamenting his unsure pronunciation and meager though exact vocabulary. The chair by the growing grate now stood empty, but that did not help. With her whole being she experienced his presence there behind the door, in the next room, and the next, and the next, and the house was suffocating from him. The clocks ticked with an effort, and the cold folded napkins stood stifling on the festive table with a strangled rose in each individual vase. But how to cough him up? How to breathe freely again? It now seemed to her that it had always been thus, that she had hated him hopelessly since the first days and nights of their marriage, when he kept pawing and licking her like an animal in a locked hotel room with the white Salzburg. He now stood in her path, in her plain, straight path, like a solid obstacle that ought somehow to be removed to let her resume her plain, straight existence. How dared he enforce upon her the complications of adultery? How dared he stand in the queue before her? Our cruelest enemy is less hateful than the burly stranger whose placid back keeps us from squeezing through the ticket window or to the counter of a sausage shop. She walked to and fro, she drummed on a window, she tore off a diseased cyclamen leaf. She felt she would suffocate any moment. At that instant the doorbell sounded. Martha checked her hairdo and walked quickly, not to the front door, but to the back door of the drawing-room in order to make an elegant entrance from afar to meet her guests. During the next half-hour the bell rang again and again. First to arrive were the inevitable Walds in their doubler limousine. Then came Franz shivering from the cold. Then almost simultaneously the Count with a bouquet of mediocre paints and paper manufacturer with his wife, and then two loud, half-naked, ill-groomed girls, whose late father had been their host's partner in happier days. Then the snub-nosed, gaunt, and taciturn director of the Fatum Insurance Company, and a rosy-cheeked civil engineer in triplicate, that is, with a sister and son comically resembling him. All this company gradually warmed up and coalesced until it formed a single many-limbed but otherwise not over-complex creature that made a mirthful noise and drank and whirled. Only Martha and Franz were unable to identify themselves as they should have been by all laws of a hearty holiday. With this animated, flushed, palpitating mass, she was pleased to note how unresponsive Franz was to the practically naked charms of those two practically identical vulgar young things with revoltingly thin arms and snaky backs, and insufficiently spanked little palpos. The injustice of life. In 10 years' time they would still be a little younger than I am now, all three of them, as a matter of fact. Every now and then her eyes and those of Franz would meet, but even without looking, he and she always sensed the changing correlation of their respective whereabouts. While he walked diagonally across the parlor with a glass of punch for Ida or Isolde, no, for Miss Wald, Martha was putting a wrestling paper hat on bald Willie at the other end of the room. As Franz sat down and started listening to what the engineer's sister, pink-cheeked and plain, had to say, Martha combined the oblique and straight line by going from Willie to the door, and then to the dining room, table laden with hors d'oeuvres. Franz lit a cigarette. Martha put on a mandarin on a plate. Thus, a chess player playing blind feels his trapped bishop and his opponent's versatile queen move in relentless relation to each other. There was a vaguely regular rhythm established in those coordinations, and not for an instant was it interrupted. She, and especially Franz, felt the existence of this invisible geometric figure. There were 2 points moving through it, and the interrelation between those 2 points could be plotted at any given moment, and though they seemed to move independently, they were nonetheless securely bound by the invisible, inexorable lines of that figure. The parquet was already littered with motley paper trash. Already somebody had broken a glass and stood speechless with sticky fingers outspread. Willie Wald, already high, wearing a golden hat and gnarled paper ribbons, his innocent blue eyes open wide, was recounting to the gruff old Count his recent trip to Russia, ardently extolling the Kremlin, the caviar, the commissars. Presently Dreyer, coatless, flushed, still holding a chef's knife and wearing a chef's cap, took Willie aside and began whispering something to him, while the rosy engineer went on telling the other guests about the three-masked individuals who one Christmas night had broken in and robbed the whole company. The photograph broke into song in the adjoining boudoir. Dreyer started to dance with one of the pretty sisters and then caught up with the other, and the girls giggled and curved their supple backs as they tried to dance with both together. Franz stood by the window drapery, regretting that he still had not time to learn the dance. He saw Martha's white hand on somebody's black shoulder, and then her profile, then a birthmark under her left shoulder blade, and somebody's thumb upon it, and the Madonna profile again, and again the raisin and the cream, and her silk sheening legs, with the hem of her short skirt revealed up to the knee, moved hither and thither, and seemed, as if one looked at them only, to belong to a woman who did not know what to do with herself from relentless anticipation. She steps, now slowly, now quickly, this way and that, turns abruptly, steps again in her excruciating impatience. Martha danced automatically, feeling not so much the rhythm of the music as the syncopic changes between her and Franz, who was standing by the drapery with folded arms and moving eyes. She noticed Dreyer reached the drapery. He must have opened the window a little, for it grew cooler in the room as she danced. She kept checking Franz's position. He was there, the dear sentinel. She searched for her husband with her eyes. He had left the room, and she told herself that the sudden coolness and well-being were due precisely to his absence. On gliding closer to Franz, she bathed him in such a familiar, meaningful look that he lost countenance and smiled at the engineer, whose face was presented to him by the whim of a whirl. Again and again the photograph was wound, and among many pairs of ordinary legs flashed those strong, graceful, ravishing legs, and Franz, dizzy from the wine and the gyrations of the dancers, became aware of a certain terpsichorean tumult in his poor head, as if all his thoughts were learning to foxtrot. Then something happened. In mid-dance, Isolde cried, "Oh, look, the drape!" Everyone looked, and indeed the window curtain stirred strangely, altered its folds, and swelled slowly. Simultaneously the lights went out. In the darkness an oval light began to move about the room. The drapery parted, and in the unsteady glimmer a masked man suddenly appeared, dressed in an old military coat and carrying a menacing flashlight in his fist. Ida gave a piercing scream. The engineer's voice calmly pronounced in the dark, "I suspect that's our genial host." Then, after a curious pause filled by the photograph, which had gone on dutifully playing in the dark, there sounded Martha's tragic voice. She gave such a howl of warning that the two girls and the old count surged back toward the door, blocked by Mary Willie. The masked figure emitted a hoarse sound and, turning the light on Martha, moved forward. It is possible the girls were genuinely frightened. It is also possible that one or two of the men were beginning to doubt its being a prank. Martha, who went on crying for help, noticed with cold exultation that the engineer standing beside her had reached back under his denim jacket and produced something from his hip pocket. She realized what her screams meant, what prompted them, and what they should cause to happen, and secure in her performance, she screamed still louder, urging, hallooing. Franz could not bear it any longer. He stood nearest of all to the intruder, had recognized him at once by his tailor-made tuxedo trousers, and now his nimble fingers ripped the mask off the intruder's face. Meanwhile, Mr. Fathom had finally overcome Panting Willie and switched on the lights. In the center of the room, dressed in a combination of Apache scarf and soldier's coat, stood Dryer, roaring with laughter, now swaying, now squatting, all red and tousled, and pointing his finger at Martha. Quickly deciding how she should now resolve her feigned terror, she turned her back upon her husband, rearranged the strap of one bare shoulder, and calmly went off to the faltering photograph. He rushed after her, and still laughing, hugged and kissed her. "Oh, I knew it was you all along," she said, which of course was quite true. Franz had been trying for some time to fight off the welling of nausea, but now he was going to be sick, and he hurriedly left the room. Behind him the hubbub continued. They were all laughing and shouting, probably crowding around Dryer, squeezing both him and Martha, who wriggled. With his handkerchief pressed to his lips, Franz made for the front hall and wrenched open the door of the toilet. Old Miss Wald came flying out like a bomb and disappeared behind the bend of the wall. My God," he muttered, muddled over. He emitted horrible sounds, recognizing in the intermittent torrent a medley of food and drink, the way a sinner in hell retastes the hash of his life. Breathing heavily, squeamishly wiping his mouth with a bit of toilet paper, he waited for a moment and pulled the chain. On his way back, he paused in the entrance hall and listened. Through an open door, a mirror reflected the ominously blazing Christmas tree. The photograph was singing again. Suddenly he saw Martha. She went up to him quickly, looking over her shoulder like a conspirator in a play. They were alone in the brightly lit hall, and from beyond the door came noise, laughter, the squeals of a helpless pig, squawks of a tortured turkey. "No luck," said Martha. "I'm sorry, dear." Her piercing eyes were at once in front of him and all around him. Then she started to cough, clutching at her side, and dropped in a chair. He asked, "What do you mean, no luck?" "It cannot go on like this," muttered Martha between fits of coughing. "It simply cannot. Why, look at yourself. You're pale as death." The noise in the house was swelling and drawing nearer, and it seemed as though the enormous tree were bellowing with all its lights. "As death," said Martha. Franz felt another onset of nausea. The voices surged forward. Sweaty Dryer rushed past, escaping from Wald and the engineer, and after them came the others, guffawing and gibbering. And Tom, locked up in the garage, was barking his head off, and the noise of the hunt seemed to pursue Franz as he vomited in the deserted street and staggered home. At the corner of the square, the scaffolding, the cocooned the future Kino Palazzo, was adorned on the very top with a bright Christmas tree. The latter could also be seen, but only as a tiny colored blur in the starry sky from the Dryer's bedroom window. "Either the two of you could make a marvelous little wife for a good old Franz," said Dryer as he undressed. "That's what you think," said Martha, glaring into her dressing table mirror. "Ida, of course, is the more beautiful," continued drunken Dryer, "but I sold her with that fluffy pale hair and that way of grasping as she does while she is telling her something comical. Why don't you sample her, or both together?" "I wonder," mused Dryer as he took off his drawers. He laughed and added, "My love, what are you about tonight? After all, it is Christmas." "Not after your idiotic joke," said Martha, "and if you pester me with your lust, I'll take my pillow to the guest room." "I wonder," repeated Dryer as he got into bed and laughed again. He had never tried them together. Might be fun. Separately, he had had them only on 2 occasions. Ida 3 summers ago, quite unexpectedly in the woods of Spandau during a picnic. Isolde a little later at a Dresden hotel. Hopelessly bad stenographers, both of them. Franz had never gone to bed yet at 4:30 in the morning. He woke up in the afternoon feeling hungry, healthy, and happy. He remembered with pleasure snatching the mask off. The roaring darkness that had pursued him like a nightmare had been transformed, now that he had surrendered himself to it, into a hum of euphoria. He dined at the nearby tavern and went back home to wait for Martha. In 10 minutes past 7 she had not come. At 20 minutes past 8, he knew she was not coming. Should he wait till tomorrow? He dared not ring her up. Martha had forbidden him, and herself, to telephone, lest it become a sweet habit which in its turn might lead to the wrong ears overhearing a careless, caressive phrase. The urge to tell her how strong and well he felt, despite all that wine and venison and music and terror, was even stronger than his desire to know if her cold was better. As he reached their street, an empty taxi overtook him and pulled up at the villa. He decided his visit was ill-timed. They were probably going out. He paused at the fence of the garden, expecting them to emerge, she in her lovely furs and he in his camel hair coat. Then, changing his mind again, Franz hurried toward the porch. The front door was ajar. Frida was pulling half-strangled Tom upstairs by his collar. In the entrance hall, Franz saw an opulent staircase of real leather and a splendid pair of hickory skis of a type they did not have at the store. In the parlor, husband and a wife stood facing each other. He was talking rapidly, and she was smiling like an angel and nodding in silence. "Ah, Franz, there you are," he said, turning, and caught his nephew by the stuffed shoulder. "You've come just at the right moment. I'm off 3 weeks or so." "What are those skis doing there?" asked Franz, and realized with surprise that Dwyer had ceased to frighten him. "Mine, I'm going to Davos, and take this, $5. He kissed his wife on the cheek. "Nurse your cold, dear. Have a good time over the holidays. Tell Franz to take you to the theater. Don't be cross with me, darling, for leaving you behind. Snow is for men and single girls. You can't change that." "You'll be late for your train," said Martha, slitting sweet eyes at him. He glanced at his golden watch, mimicked panic, and grasped his valise. The taxi driver helped with the skis. Uncle, aunt, and nephew crossed the garden. After all that frost and drizzle had set in. Hatless and wearing her moleskin coat, Martha strolled to the wicket in an indolent swing of the hips, her hands invisibly clasped in her joined coat sleeves. It took quite a long time to arrange the long skis on the roof of the taxi. At last the door slammed. The taxi drove off. Franz mechanically noted its license number, 22221. This unexpected one seemed odd after so many twos. They walked slowly back toward the house along the crunching path. "It's thawing again," said Martha. "Today my cough is much less harsh." Franz thought for a moment and said, "Yes, but there are still some cold days ahead." "Possibly," said Martha. When they entered the empty house, Franz had the impression they had returned for a funeral. "8. She began teaching him obstinately and fervidly. After the first embarrassment, stumblings, and perplexities, he gradually began to understand what she was communicating to him, doing so with almost no words of explanation, almost entirely through pantomime. He gave his full attention both to her and the undulating sounds, and to the ululating sound, which, now rising, now falling, accompanied him constantly, and already he perceived in that sound rhythmic demands, a compelling meaning, regular breaks and beats. What Martha wanted of him was proving to be so simple. As soon as he had assimilated something, she would nod silently, looking down the while with an intent smile, as though following the motions and growth of an already distinct shadow. His awkwardness, that feeling of having a limp and a hump, which tormented him in the beginning, all this soon disappeared. Instead, the erect poise, the spacious grace, and the pace she was teaching him enslaved him totally. Now he could no longer disobey the sound whose mystery he had solved. Vertigo became a habitual and pleasurable state, and automaton's somnambulic languor, the law of his existence. Now Martha would gently exult and press her temple against his, knowing that they were at one, that he would do the proper thing. While teaching him, she restrained her impatience. The impatience he had once noticed in the flash and flicker of her elegant legs. Now she stood before him, and holding up her pleated skirt between finger and thumb, she repeated the steps in slow motion so that he might see for himself the magnified turn of the toe and heel. He would attempt a scooping caress, but she would slap his hand away and go on with the lesson, and when under the pressure of her strong palm he learned how to turn and spin, when his steps had finally fallen in with hers, when a glance at the mirror told her that the clumsy lesson had become a harmonious dance, then she increased the pace, gave her excitement its head, and her rapid cries expressed fierce satisfaction with his obedient piston slide. He came to know the reeling expanse of parquetry, and huge halls surrounded by lodges. He leaned his elbow on the faded plush of their parapet. He wiped her powder off his shoulder, saw himself in her surfeited mirrors. He paid predatory waiters out of her black silk purse, his mackintosh and her beloved moleskin coat embraced for hours on end in the darkness of a heavily laden hangars under the guard of sleepy cloakroom girls, and the sonorous names of all the fashionable ballrooms and dancing cafes, tropical, crystal, royal, became as familiar to him as the names of the streets of the little town where he had dwelt in a previous life. and presently they would be sitting at the next dance, still panting from amorous exertions, side by side on the drab couch in the stingy room. "Happy New Year," said Martha, "our year. Write to your mother, whom I certainly would like to know, that you are having a splendid time. Think how surprised she will be later, afterwards, when I shall meet her." He asked, "When? Have you fixed a deadline?" "As soon as possible, the sooner the better." "Oh, we mustn't dawdle." She leaned back on the cushions, her hands behind her head. "A month, perhaps 2. We have to plan very carefully, my dear love." "I'd go mad without you," said Franz. "Everything upsets me. This wallpaper, the people in the street, my landlord. His wife never shows herself. It's so strange." "You must be calmer, otherwise nothing will work out. Come here." "I know it will turn out wonderfully," he said, pressing against her. "Only we must make sure of everything. The smallest mistake—" "Oh, how can you doubt my strong, stout Franz?" "No, of course not. God, no. Oh, my God, no. It's just that we have to find a sure method. Fast, darling, much faster. Don't you hear the rhythm?" They were no longer coupling on the couch, but fox-trotting among gleaming white tables on the bright-lit floor of a cafe. The orchestra was playing and gasping for breath. There was among the dancers a tall American who smiled tolerantly as one passionate pair bumped into him and his blonde partner. "We'll find it. We must find it," continued Martha in a rapid patter in time to the music. "After all, we are within our rights." He saw her long, sweet, burning eye and the geranium lobe of her little ear from beneath her sleek bandeau. If only he could glide thus forever, an eternal piston-rod in a vacuum of delight, and never, never part from her. But there still existed the store, where he bowed and turned like a jolly doll, and there were still the nights when, like a dead doll, he lay supine on his bed, not knowing whether he was asleep or awake, and who was what, shuffling and two-stepping and whispering in the corridor, and why was the alarm clock jazzing in his ear? But let us say we are awake, and here comes bushy-browed old Inricht bringing up 2 cups of coffee. Why 2, and how depressing those torn silk socks on the floor. One such blurry morning, a Sunday, when he and Martha in her beige dress were walking decorously about the snow-powdered garden, she wordlessly showed him a snapshot she had just received from Davos. It showed a smiling Dreyer in a Scandinavian ski suit, clutching his poles. His skis were beautifully parallel, and all around was bright snow, and on the snow one could distinguish the photographer's narrow-shouldered shadow. When the photographer, a fellow skier and teacher of English, Mr. Vivian Badluck, had clicked the shutter and straightened up, Dreyer, still beaming, moved his left ski forward. However, he was standing on a slight incline. The ski went further than he intended, and with a great flourish of ski poles he tumbled heavily on his back, while both girls shot past shrieking with laughter. For a while he could not get the darned skis uncrossed, and for his arm kept going into the snow up to the elbow. By the time he got up, disfigured by the snow, and put on his snow-crusted mittens, and cautiously began to glide down, his face bore a solemn expression. He had dreamed of performing all kinds of Christianas and telemarks, flying downhill, turning sharply in a cloud of snow, but apparently God had not willed it. And the snapshot, though, he looked like a real skier, and he admired it before slipping it into the envelope. But that morning, as he stood by the window in his yellow pajamas and looked at the green larches and the cobalt sky, he reflected that he had been there 2 weeks, and yet his skiing and his English were even worse than the previous winter. From the snow-blue road came the jingle of sleigh bells. Isolde and Ida were giggling in the bathroom, but enough was enough. He remembered with a pang of pleasure the inventor, who must already be at work in the laboratory set up for him, and he also remembered a number of other entertaining projects connected with the expansion of the dandy store. He pondered all this, looked at the snowy slope crisscrossed with skinny ski tracks, and decided to depart for home instead of time leaving his girlfriends to their own devices, which were not negligible. And there was another amusing thought that he deliberately kept in the back of his mind. It would not be fun to come home unexpectedly and catch Martha's soul unawares, and see whether she would let escape a radiant smile of surprise, or meet him with her usual ironic morosity, as she certainly would if she warned of his arrival. Despite his keen sense of humor, morosity, as she certainly would if he warned of his arrival. Despite his keen sense of humor, Dreyer was too naively self-centered to realize how thoroughly those sudden returns had been exploited in ribald tales. Franz ripped the photo into little bits, which the wind carried across the wet lawn. "Silly," said Martha. "Why did you do that? He's sure to ask me if I passed it in the album." "Some day I'll tear up the album too," said Franz. An eager Tom had come running toward him. He hoped Franz might have thrown a ball or a pebble, but a rapid search revealed nothing. A couple of days later, Frida was allowed to spend the weekend with the family, with her brother, a fireman in Potsdam, and brightest Rembrandtesque gleam in her gloomy light. Tom was compelled to spend more time than usual in the gardener's quarters next to the careless garage. Martha and Franz yielding to the agonizing desire to assert themselves, to be free, to enjoy their freedom, decided, if only for one evening, to live as they craved to live. It was to be for a dress rehearsal of future happiness. "Today you are master here," she said. "Here is your study, here's your armchair. Here, if you want, is the paper. The market has rallied." He flung off his jacket and sauntered through all the rooms as if reviewing them upon returning to his own comfortable house from a long and difficult journey. "Everything in order? Is my lord happy?" He put his arm around her shoulder, and they stood side by side before the mirror. He was poorly shaven that evening, and instead of a waistcoat had put on a rather casual dark red sweater. There was something homey and quiet about Martha, too. He recently washed hair did not lie smoothly. She wore a woolen jumper that was unbecoming but somehow right. "Mr. and Miss Bubendorf, you know, once we were standing like this, I was sure you'd kiss me for the first time, but you didn't. I'm now an inch taller," he said with a laugh. "Look, we are almost the same height." He sank into the leather armchair, and she sat in his lap, and the fact that she had gained weight was quite bottom-heavy made things all the more cozy. "I love your ear," he said, lifting up a strand of hair with a nose-wrinkling horse nuzzle. A clock began chiming gently and tunefully in the next room. Franz laughed softly. "Imagine if he were suddenly to come in just now, just like that." "Who?" asked Martha. "I don't understand whom you're speaking about." "I mean him, if he should come home all at once. He has such a stealthy way of opening doors." "Oh, you are speaking of my late husband." "Oh, I see," said Martha in a smoky voice. "No, my deceased was always a man of precision. He would let me know. No, Franz, not now. After supper, perhaps. I think he meant to be an example to his little wife, who otherwise might visit him. I said no, without warning, in that little room with the couch he asked at the back of his office. Silence, matrimonial well-being. The deceased," chuckled Franz. "The deceased. Do you remember him well?" murmured Martha, rubbing her nose against his neck. "Vaguely, and you?" The red fur on his belly, and in atrocious, disparaging, and quite inaccurate terms she described the dead man's private parts. "Pah," said Franz. "Don't make me throw up." "Franz," she said, her eyes beaming, "no one will ever find out. We're accustomed now to the idea." By now quite tame and bloodthirsty, he nodded in silence. A certain numbness was invading his lower limbs. "We did it so simply, so neatly," said Martha, slitting her eyes as if in dim recollection. "Not the merest shadow of suspicion, nothing. And why, sir? Because destiny is on our side. It could not have been otherwise. Remember the funeral? Pifke's tulips? Isolda's and Ida's violets brought from a street beggar?" He mutely acquiesced again. "It was during the final fall. We had forsythias in the bay window, remember? I was still coughing, but it was already a soft, wet, delicious cough. Getting rid of the last thick glob." Franz winced. Another pause. "You know, my knees are getting sort of tired. No, wait, don't get up. Just move over a little. That's right. My treasure, my all," she cried. "My darling husband. I never imagined there could be such a marriage as ours." He passed his lips along her warm neck and said, "Isn't it time for us to lie down a bit, eh? What about some cold cuts and beer? No? Okay, we shall eat afterwards." She rose, leaning hard on him as she did so. Then she stretched herself. "Let's go up," she said with a contented yawn. "To our bedroom." "Is that all right?" asked Franz. "I thought we'd do it here." "Of course not. Oh, come on, get up. It's already past 10. "You know, I'm still a little scared of the deceased," said Franz, biting his lip. "Oh, he won't be coming for a week yet. That's sure as death. What's there to be scared of, little fool? Or don't you want me?" "Oh, I do," said Franz, "but you must cover his bed. I don't want to see it. It would put me off." She turned off the lights in the parlor, and he followed her up an inner staircase that was short and creaky. Then they passed through a baby-blue corridor. "Why on earth are you walking on tiptoe?" exclaimed Martha with a loud laugh. "Can't you understand? We're married. Married!" She showed him the mangle room, which she used for her Hindu kitsch exercises, her dressing room, his and her bathroom, and finally their bedroom. "The deceased used to sleep on that bed there," she said, "but of course the sheets have been changed. Let me put this tiger rug over it. Would you like to wash or something?" "No, I'll wait for you here," said Franz, examining a soft doll on the night table. "All right, undress quick and hop into my bed. I have a great need." She left the door ajar. Her pleated skirt and cardigan were already lying on a chair. From the toilet across the corridor came the steady, thick, rapid sound of his sister making water. It stopped. Martha passed into the bathroom. He suddenly felt that in this cold, inimical, unbearably white room where everything reminded him of the dead man, he was unable to undress, let alone make love. With revulsion and fear he gazed at the next bed. Then he strained his ears. He thought he heard a door slam downstairs, followed by creeping steps. He darted to the corridor. Simultaneously, Martha came out of the bathroom, stark naked. "Something's happened," he said in a spitting whisper. "We're not alone any more. Listen to that noise." Martha frowned. Wrapping herself in a negligee, she went down the corridor and stopped with her head bent sideways. "I'm telling you, I've heard." "I too had a bizarre feeling," said Martha in a low voice. "I know, darling, you are terribly disappointed, but we'd better not go on with this madness. It won't be long now. You'd better go. I'll come tomorrow as usual. But if I meet somebody downstairs, there's no one there, Franz. Here, take my keys. You'll return them tomorrow." She accompanied him as far as the main staircase, still listening. Now she was as puzzled and upset as he. "Oh!" Down in the hall, harsh bangs resounded. Franz stopped, clutching at the banister, but she gave a laugh of relief. "I know what it is," she said. "That's the downstairs toilet. It sometimes bangs at night if there's a big wind, and you don't close it well." "I'll admit I was a little frightened," said Franz. "All the same, you better go, darling. We mustn't take risks. Close that door in passing, will you?" He embraced her. She let herself be kissed on a bare shoulder, drawing back herself the lace of her negligee to grant him that farewell treat. She remained standing on the landing of the theatrically illumined blue staircase until with a winky he was gone. A strong, clean wind hit him in the face. The gravel path crunched pleasantly and securely beneath his feet. Franz inhaled deeply, then he cursed. She was so sinful and beautiful. She made him feel like a man again. Why was he such a coward? To think that a spectre, a cadaver, had turned him out of the house where he, Franz, was the real master. Muttering as he went something that had happened to him rather often of late, he walked swiftly along the dark sidewalk, and then, without looking right or left, began diagonally crossing the street at the place where he always crossed it on his way home. A taxicab's horn, nasal and nasty, made him jump back. Still muttering, Franz turned the corner. Meanwhile, the taxi braked and uncertainly pulled up to the curb. The driver got out and opened the door. "What number did you say?" he asked. No answer. The driver, reaching into the darkness, shook his fare by the shoulder. Finally, the latter opened his eyes, leaned forward. "Number 5, he replied to the driver's question. "You're a little off." The bedroom window glowed. Martha was arranging her hair for the night. Suddenly she froze, still with the raised elbows. Now she heard quite distinctly a loud clatter as if something had fallen. She darted toward the stairs. From the front hall came peals of laughter, familiar laughter, alas. He was laughing because, having turned awkwardly with the long skis on his shoulder, he had dropped one of them while knocking it off the other. The white brush, he flew up like a bird from the looking-glass shelf, after which he had tripped over his own suitcase. "I am the Voyager," he cried in his best English. "I have returned from skiing." The next instant he knew perfect happiness. There was a magnificent smile on Martha's face. Oh, no doubt, he was pretty to look at, tanned, trimmed by gravity's shedder of at least 5 pounds, as if Martha and Franz had already started to demolish him. But she was looking not at him. She was looking somewhere over his head, welcoming not him, but a wise fate that had so simply and honestly averted a crude, ridiculous, dreadfully overworked disaster. "A miracle saved us," she later told Franz, for people talk very lightly of miracles. "But let's be a lesson. You can see for yourself it's impossible to wait any longer. Lucky once, lucky twice, and then caught. And what can we expect then? Let us suppose he gives me a divorce. Let us even suppose I catch him with a stenographer. He does not have to support me if I remarry. What next? I'm just as poor as you. My relatives in Hamburg are not going to help me." Franz shrugged. "I wonder if you understand," she said, "that this widow inherits a fortune." "Why do you tell me this? We have discussed it sufficiently. I know perfectly well there's only one solution." Then, as she peered through the slippery glint of his glasses deep into the mire of his greenish eyes, she knew that she had achieved her end, that he had been fully prepared, was completely ripened, that the time had come to act. She was right. Franz no longer had a will of his own. The best he could do was refract her will in his own way. The easy fulfillment of 2 merged dreams had become familiar to him, owing to a very simple interplay of sensations. By now Dryer had already been several times murdered and buried. Not a future happiness, but a future recollection that had been rehearsed on a bare stage before a dark and empty house. With stunning unexpectedness, the corpse had returned out of nowhere, and walked in like an animated snowman, and begun talking as if he were alive. But what of it? It would be easy now, and not at all frightening, to cope with this sham existence, to make the corpse a corpse once more, and this time for good. The discussion of methods of murder came with them in everyday manner. No uneasiness, no shame accompanied it, neither did they experience the dark thrill gamblers know, or the comfortable horror a family man enjoys when reading about the destruction of another family with gory details in a family newspaper. The words bullet and poison began to sound about as normal as bullion or pullet, as ordinary as a doctor's pill or pill. The process of killing a man could be considered as calmly as the recipes of a cookbook, and no doubt Martha first of all thought of poison because of a woman's innate domestic bent, an instinctive knowledge of spices and herbs, of the healthful and the harmful. From a second-rate encyclopedia they learned about all sorts of dismal Lucrezias and Lucustas. A hollow diamond ring filled with rainbow venom or tormented Franz's imagination. He would dream at night of treacherous handshake. Half awake, he'd recoil and not dare to move. Somewhere under him in the street, the prickly ring had just rolled, and he was terrified it might sting him. But in the daytime, with Martha's serene light, all was simple again. Tofana, a Sicilian girl, was dispatched 639 people, sold her aqua in vials, mislabeled with the innocent image of a saint. The Earl of Leicester had a mellower method. His victim would blissfully sneeze after a pinch of lethal snuff. Martha would impatiently shut the PR volume and search in another. They learned with complete indifference that toxemia caused anemia, and that Roman law saw in deliberate intoxication a blend of murder and betrayal. Deep thinkers, remarked Martha with a snarling laugh, sharply turning the page. Still she could not get to the heart of the matter. A sardonic sea sent her to something called alkaloids. Another sea led to the fang of a centipede. Magnified, if you please. Franz, unaccustomed to big encyclopedias, breathed heavily as he looked over her shoulder, climbing through the barbed wire of formulae. They read for a long time about these uses of morphine, until, having reached in some tortuous way a special case of pneumonia cruposa, Martha suddenly understood that the toxin in question belonged to the domesticated variety. Turning to another letter, they discovered that strychnine caused spasms in frogs and laughing fits in some islanders. Martha was beginning to fume. She kept brutally yanking out the thick tomes and squeezing them back any which way in the bookcase. There were fleeting glimpses of colored plates, military decorations, Etruscan vases, gaudy butterflies. Here, this is more like it, said Martha, and she read in a low, solemn voice, vomiting, a feeling of dejection, a singing in the airs. Don't wheeze like that, please. A sensation of itching and burning over the entire surface of the skin, the pupils narrowed to the size of a pinhead, testicles swollen like oranges. Franz remembered how as an adolescent he looked up onanism in a much smaller encyclopedia at school and remained terrified and chaste for almost a week. Chucks, said Martha. That's all medical rot. Who wants to know about cures or about traces of arsenic found in stinking dead? I suppose we need some special works. There is a treatise mentioned here in parentheses, but it is a work written in the 16th century in Latin. Why people should use Latin is beyond me. Pull yourself together, Franz. He's here. She unhurriedly put the volume back and unhurriedly closed the glass doors of the cabinet. From the ancient world of the dead came Dryer, whistling as he approached with a bouncing dog. But she did not give up the idea of poison. In the morning, alone, she again scanned the evasive articles in the encyclopedia, trying to find that plain, unhistorical, unspectacular, matter-of-fact potion or powder that she so clearly imagined. By accident, at the end of one paragraph, she came upon the brief bibliography of possible-looking modern works. She sought Franz's advice as to whether they ought to obtain one of them. She gave her a blank look, but said that if it were necessary he would go and buy it. But she was afraid of letting him go alone. They might tell him that the book had to be ordered, or it would turn out to consist of 10 volumes costing 25 marks each. He might get flustered foolishly, leave his address. If she were to accompany him, he would, of course, behave splendidly, naturally and casually, as if he were a student of medicine or chemistry. But it was dangerous to go together, and that was why public libraries were taboo. And once you get involved in the book racket and begin running from shop to shop, the devil knows what kind of nonsense might ensue. In her mind, she now reviewed the little she had known before, the little she had dug up about the poisoner's techniques. 2 things she had gleaned. First, that every poison has its echo, an antidote, and secondly, that a sudden death led to inquisitive, zestful autopsy. However, for quite some time longer, with the obedient cooperation of Franz, who once quite lied his own, the dutiful darling bought at a street stall the true story of the Marquis de Brinvilliers. Martha continued to toy with the idea. The most attractive poison seemed to be cyanide. It had a brisk something about it with no romantic trimmings. An ordinary mouse that has swallowed an insignificant fraction of 1 gram falls dead before it can run 30 inches. She saw the stuff as a pinch in a colorless powder which could be dropped unnoticed with a lump of sugar into a cup of tea. It states here in that certain cases cyanide can be traced to the cadaver. But what certain cases? Tell us. Oh, it would be so simple, she said to Franz. We'll have tea together in the evening with those delicious little eclairs Menzel makes, and he'd swallow this tea in cream, and you know the quick way he does it, and suddenly, poof. Well, let's get that powder, he replied. I would get it if I had any idea how and where. Should I go to a pharmacy or what? I don't know either, said Martha. I read in a detective story about shady little cafes where one gets in touch with sellers of cocaine, but that's a long way to the stuff we need. Poisons are out, I'm afraid, unless of course we can manage to bribe a doctor so that he would not dissect him. But that's too risky. Somehow I was absolutely certain they existed, those absolutely safe poisons. How stupid they don't. What a pity, Franz. You're not studying medicine. You could find out. You could decide then. I'm ready to do anything, he said in a strained voice, for at that moment he was bending and pulling off his shoes. They were new and pinched. I'm game for anything. We've wasted a lot of time, sighed Martha. Of course, I'm no scientist. I'm only a woman. She carefully folded on a chair the dress she had taken off. The February wind was rattling the window pane, and she shivered as she stepped out of her panties. In the beginning of the winter she started pulling on warm underwear for her visits to him, but he had hated her incongruous appearance in those oatmeal tights which were almost as long and tedious to peel off as his own, and made her hips and bosom appear like those of a certain particularly offensive dully rounded dummy in the store opposite the service lift. And after a while she stopped wearing anything but his favorite frills against her goose flesh. One must study poisons for years and years, she said, tidily rolling down her stockings, which she wanted to keep but did not want to tear. Hopeless, hopeless, she sighed as she loosened the bed covers. It would be warmer today between sheets, though she knew he preferred the couch. You will be a chemist of genius with a long white beard when at last we offer him that cup of tea. Meanwhile, slowly and meticulously, Franz was draping his jacket over the broad shoulders of a special hanger filched from the store, after having removed and placed on the table a wallet containing a $5 bill, 7 marks or 6 post stamps, a little notebook, a fountain pen, 2 pencils, his keys, and a letter to his mother that he had forgotten to mail. Ruminative, naked, morose, he sniffed one armpit and tossed his undershirt under the washstand. It landed on the floor next to a rubber basin with Martha's rather depressing paraphernalia. He kicked the undershirt into a corner. She could wash it for him after tomorrow with socks, which were comparatively clean. Well, to work, old soldier. Because he wore glasses even for lovemaking, he reminded her of a handsome, hairy, young pearl driver, ready to pry the live pearl out of its rosy shell, as in that Russian ballet they had seen together, or that picture of conches facing the last page in volume M. He took off his wristwatch, listened to it, and put it on the night table near the alarm clock. There was less than half an hour left. They had dwelt too long on the cyanide. Hurry, darling, hurry up, said Martha from under the blankets. Oh, what a corn I've developed, he grunted, placing his bare foot on the edge of the chair and examining the hard yellow bump on his 5th toe. And yet it's the right size of the shoes. I don't know, maybe my feet are still growing. Franz, do come, dear. You can inspect it later. In due time he did, in fact, give his corn a thorough examination. Martha, after a brisk ablution, lay down again, replete with physical bliss. The callus was like stone to the touch. He pressed it with a finger and shook his head. A kind of listless seriousness accompanied all his movements. He pouted, he scratched the crown of his head, then with the same listless thoroughness he began studying the other foot, which seemed smaller and smelled differently. He just could not reconcile in his mind the fact that the size was correct and the shoes pinched. There they stood, the rascals, side by side. American type, knobby-nosed, or nice reddish-brown. He eyed them suspiciously. They had cost quite a lot, even with a rabat. He slowly unhooked the glasses, breathed on the lenses, his mouth forming a lowercase O, and wiped them with a corner of the sheet. Then just as slowly he put them on. Martha looked at the clock. Yes, it was time to get dressed and go. You absolutely must come to supper tonight, she said, pulling up her stocking and snapping her garters. I don't mind so much where there are guests, but to sit alone with him. I can't bear it any more, and put on your old shoes. Tomorrow you'll go and have these stretched for you, free of course. Every day is precious. Oh, how precious. He was sitting on the bed, clasping his knees and staring at a point of light on the decanter that stood in the washstand. With his round head and prominent ears he seemed special, so lovable to her. In his attitude, in his fixed gaze, there was the immobility of hypnosis. It crossed her mind that one word from her at this very moment could make him rise and follow her, as he was, as naked as a little boy, downstairs through the streets. Her feeling of happiness now attained such a degree of brightness, and she imagined so vividly the regular, well-planned, straightforward course of their common existence after the elimination, that she was afraid to disturb Franz's immobility, the immobile image of future happiness. She quickly finished dressing, slipped into her coat, took her hat, threw him a kiss, and was off. In the front hall, before a slightly better mirror than the one in her lover's room, she powdered her nose and put on her hat. How becomingly her cheeks were burning. The landlord emerged from the toilet and made her a low bow. "How is your wife feeling?" she asked, looking back as she took hold of the doorknob. He bowed again. She reflected that his wizard-like old codger was sure to know something about the methods of poisoning people. It would be curious to know what they do, he and that invisible old woman of his. And for a few days longer she could not get rid of herself of the dream of magic powders instantly dissolving in death's nothingness, even though she knew already that there was nothing would come of it. A complicated, dangerous, outdated practice. Yes, that was it, outdated, whereas in the middle of the last century an average of 50 cases of poisoning were investigated annually. Statistics show that in modern time, yes, that was the point. Dwyer raised the cup to his lip. Involuntarily, Franz met Martha's eyes. The snow-white table described a slow circle with a crystal vase for a hub. Dwyer put his half-empty cup down, and the table stopped revolving. "The light there is not particularly good," he continued, "and it's cold. The resonance is terrific. Every bounce makes an echo. I think the place used to be a riding school, but of course that's the only way to keep in training. One serve does not fall apart during the winter. In any event, a final swallow of tea. Spring, thank heavens, is in the air, and it will soon be possible to play out of doors. My new club comes to life in April, and then I'll invite you, eh, Franz?" The previous day at 9 in the morning he had created a minor sensation by appearing in sports goods, which he seldom visited during the winter. From behind a stucco column, Franz saw him stop to chat with a respectably blowing Pifke. The salesgirls and Mr. Schwimmer stood at attention. An early customer who wanted another ball for his dog was ignored for an instant. "Regards to your cockroaches," said Dwyer to Pifke, cryptically and merely, and then came up to the counter behind which, in the meantime, Franz had slipped and feigned to be occupied with pad and pencil. "Work, work, my boy," he said with the absent-minded geniality with which he always addressed his nephew, whom he had filed away in his mind long ago under cretin, with cross-references to milksop and sympathetic. Then he advanced with humorously outstretched hand toward an unresponsive young man of painted wood who had been changed recently into tennis togs. The shopgirls had dubbed him Ronald. Dwyer stood before the red-sweatered oaf for a long time, looking with contempt at his posture and olive face, and thinking with a tender excitement about the task with which the happy inventor was struggling with. From the way Ronald held his racket, it was obvious he could not hit a single ball, even an abstract ball in the world of wood. Ronald's stomach was sucked in, his face bore an expression of insane self-satisfaction. Dwyer noticed with a shock that Ronald was wearing a tie, encouraging people to wear ties for tennis. He turned. Another young man, more or less alive and even wearing glasses, dutifully listened to the boss's brief instructions. "By the way, Franz," asked Dwyer, "show me the very best rackets." Franz complied. Touched, Pifke watched with a melting gaze from afar. Dwyer selected an English racket. He gave the amber strings a couple of twangy flips. He balanced it on the back of his finger to see which was heavier, frame or grip. He swung it in a passable imitation of a good player's backhand drive. It was a comfortable 13.5. "Keep it in a press," he said to Franz. Emotion clouded the young man's glasses. "Token of affection, modest gift," said Dwyer, in an explanatory patter, and casting an unfriendly last glance at vulgar Ronald, he walked away, with Pifke trotting beside him. Although strictly speaking it was not at all part of his job, Franz embraced the wooden corpse and started undoing its tie. As he worked at it, he could not help noticing the stiff cold neck. Then he undid a tight button, the shirt collar opened. The dead body was a brownish green with the darker blotches, paler discolorations. Because of the open collar, Ronald's fixed, condescending grin became even more caddish and indecent. Ronald had a dark brown smear under one eye, as if he had been punched there. Ronald had a pied chin. Ronald's nostrils were clogged with black dust. Franz tried to recall where he had seen that horrible face before. Yes, of course, long, long ago, in the train. In the same train there had been a beautiful lady wearing a black hat and a little diamond swallow. Cold, fragrant, Madonna-like. He tried to resurrect her features in his memory, but failed to do so. "9. A purposeful gaiety, a dash of excitement, now marked the reins. They no longer drizzled aimlessly, they breathed. They spoke. Violet crystals, like bath salts, were dissolved in rainwater. Puddles consisted not of liquid mud, but limpid pigments that made beautiful pictures reflecting house fronts, lamp posts, fences, blue and white sky, a bare instep, a bicycle pedal, two fat taxi drivers, a garbage collector in a sand-colored apron, a housemaid with golden hair ablaze in the sun, a white baker with glistening rubbers on his bare feet, a bearded old emigre with a dinner pail in his hand, two women with two dogs, and a gray-suited man in a gray Borsalino had crowded together on the sidewalk, looking up at the corner turret of an apartment house across the street where, conversing shrilly, a score of swallows swarmed. Then the yellow garbage collector rolled his yellow can up to the truck The chauffeurs returned to their vehicles. The baker hopped back on his bicycle, the pretty servant maid went on into a stationery store, and the women trailed off behind their dogs, which were beside themselves with new scents. The last to move off was the man in gray, the only bearded foreigner with his dinner pail, and a Russian-language newspaper remained in a trance, gazing up at a roof-remote Tula. The man in the gray hat walked slowly, squinting because of a sudden flashes of zigzag light cast by passing windshields. There was something in the air that produced an amusing feeling of dizziness, alternate waves of warm and cold flowing over the body beneath his silk shirt, a funny levity, an ethereal flutter, a loss of identity, name, profession. He had just lunched and theoretically was supposed to return to his office on the first day of spring. However, the notion of office had quietly evaporated. Toward him, along the sunlit side of the street, came a slender bob-haired lady in a coracle coat and a boy of 4 or 5 in a blue sailor suit, rolling beside her on a tricycle. "Erica," claimed the man, and stopped with outspread arms. The boy, pedaling energetically, rolled past, but his mother paused, blinking in the sunlight. She was now more elegant. The features of her mobile, intelligent, bird-like face seemed even more delicate than in the past, but the aura, the flame of her former charm, had gone. She was 26 at the time they had parted. "I've seen you twice in 8 years," she said, in that familiar, rasping, rapid little voice. "Once you went by in an open car, and I once saw you at the theater. You were with a tall, dark lady. That was your wife, wasn't it? I was sitting—" That's right, he said, laughing with pleasure and weighing on his large palm, her little hand in its tight white glove. "But you were the last person I expected to meet today, though it is the best day to meet. I thought you went back to Vienna. The play was King, Queen, Knave, and now they were making a film of it. I saw you, too. And what about you? Are you married?" She was talking at the same time, so that their dialogue was hard to record. Music paper would be necessary with 2 clefs. As he was saying, "You were the last person," she was already continuing, 10 seats or so away from you. "You haven't changed, Kurt. Only your mustache is cropped now. Yes, that's my boy. No, I'm not married. Yes, mostly in Austria. Yes, Queen, Queen, Knave. 7 years, said old Kurt. "Let's walk here a little," guiding the pleased boy's tricycle into the small public garden. "You know, I just saw the first— no, not quite that much. Millions. I know you are making millions. I'm getting along quite all right myself." "Not quite that much," Kurt put in. "But tell me. I'm very happy. I've only had 4 lovers after you, but to make up for it, each was richer than the last, and now I'm exceptionally nicely established. He has a consumptive wife, the daughter of a general. She lives abroad. In fact, he had just left to spend a month with her at Davos. Goodness, I've been there last Christmas. He is elderly and very chic, and he adores me. And you, Kurt, are you happy?" Kurt smiled and gave a little push to the boy in blue, who had come to a parting of paths. The child looked up at him with round eyes, and then, making a tooting noise with his lips, pedaled on. "No, his father is a young Englishman, and look, his hair is done just like mine, but the color is still redder. If anyone had told me then, when we stood on that stairs—" He listened to her rapid chatter and recalled 1,000 trifles, an old poem he liked to repeat. "I am the page of high Burgundy, chocolates with liqueur inside. No, this one is with marzipan again, always marzipan for little Erica. I want one with curacao, or at least kirsch. The Ponty kings of moonlit stone in the Tier Garden, so dignified on a spring night, with the lilacs in grey fluffy bloom under the arc lights, with moving patterns on the white stairs. Such sweet smells! Oh God, those 2 briefly happy years when Erica had been his mistress. He visualized as an irregular series of such trifles, the picture composed of postage stamps in her front hall, her way of jumping up and down on the sofa or sitting on her hands, or of suddenly sprinkling his face with rapid little pats, and La Boheme, which she adored, the trips to the country which they had fruit wine on a terrace, the brooch she had lost there, all those vaporous, frivolous, pathetic memories come alive within him, while Erica was telling him at top speed about her new apartment, her piano, her lover's business. "Are you happy at least, Kurt?" she asked again. "Remember," he said, and sang off-key with feeling, "Mi chiamano mi. Oh no, I'm not bohemian any more." She laughed with a little shake of her head. "But you are still the same, Kurt." So she shaped several consecutive words with her no longer maddening mouth, not finding the right one, so lacking in common sense. "Such a nitwit," he said, and gave the little boy, expectantly hunched over the handlebars, another push, tried to stroke his curly head, but was already too far. "You haven't replied. Are you happy?" insisted Erica. "Tell me, please, please." The poem's lips kept coming back to him, and he quoted. Her lips were pale, but when kissed glowed red. "And if the end one guesses, still I must not tell what I leave unsaid about a queen's caresses. Don't you remember, Erica? You would recite it with curtsies. Oh, don't you remember? I certainly don't, but I was asking you, Kurt, does your wife love you? How shall I put it? You see, she is not what you call a passionate woman. She does not make love on a bench or a park, or a balcony like a swallow. Is she faithful to you, your queen? Er blas lip verrot in kus. I bet she deceives you, but I'm telling you she's cold and reasonable and self-controlled. Love her, she does not know the first letter of adultery. You're not the best witness in the world, laughed Erica. You never knew I deceived you until his fiancé rang you up. Oh, and I could just see what you would do with your wife. You love her and don't notice her. You love her, oh, ardently, and don't bother about what she's like inside. You kiss her and still don't notice her. You've always been thoughtless, Kurt, and in the long run you'll always be what you've been, the perfectly happy egotist. Oh, I have studied you carefully. So have I, he said. Thus speaks the page of high Burgundy, the train of a queen he bears. Dum-dee-dee, her mouth dum-dee, on marble-pillared stairs. You know, Kurt, to be quite frank, there are moments when you may be simply miserable. I would realize that you are merely skimming along the surface. You see a person on a little shelf and think she'll keep sitting like that forever, but you know she tumbles off, and you think she is still sitting there, and even when she vanishes, you don't give a hoot. On the contrary, he interrupted. I'm very observant. The color of your hair was blonde, and now it is reddish. As in the past, she gave him a tap of assumed exasperation. I've long stopped being cross with you, Kurt. Come and have coffee with me soon. He won't be back till midday. We'll have a chat. We'll remember old times. Certainly, he said, feeling suddenly bored, and knowing perfectly well that he would never do it. She handed him her card. With a couple of minutes later, he tore up and crammed into an ashtray of a taxi. She shook his hand many times in parting, still chattering very fast. Funny, Erica, that little face, the batting eyelashes, the turned-up nose, the hoarse, hurried patter. The boy on the tricycle also preferred his hand and immediately wheeled away, his knees coming high and fast. Dryer looked back as he walked and waved his hat several times. Then he begged pardon of a clumsy lamp-post, put on his hat, and walked on. On the whole, an unnecessary encounter. Now I shall never remember Erica as I remembered her before. Erica number 2 will always be in the way, so deeper and quite useless, with the useless little Vivian on his tricycle. Now is it right to let her infer that I am not quite happy? In what way am I unhappy? Why talk like that? Why should I want a hot little whore in my house? Perhaps her whole charm lies in the fact that she is so cold. After all, there should be a cold shiver in the sensation of true happiness. She's exactly that chill. Erica, with her dyed hair, cannot understand that the Queen's coldness is the best guarantee, the best loyalty. I should not have answered like that. And besides, everything around those sparkling puddles, why do bakers wear rubbers without socks? I don't know, but every day, every instant, all this around me laughs, gleams, begs to be looked at, to be loved. The world stands like a dog pleading to be played with. Erica has forgotten 1,000 little sayings and songs in that poem, and Mimi in her pink hat, and the fruit wine, and the spot of moonlight on the bench that first time. I think I'll make a date with Ida tomorrow. Next day, Dryer was particularly cheerful. At the office, he dictated to Miss Reich an absolutely impossible letter to an old respectable firm. In the evening, in the strangely lighted workshop, where a miracle was slowly coming to life, he gave the inventor such slaps on the back that the latter doubled up. He telephoned he would be late for supper, and when he came home at 10:30, he kidded poor Franz, examining him on the science of salesmanship, asking him absurd questions such as, what would you do if my wife visited your department and before your very eyes stole Ronald? Franz, to whom humor, especially Dryer's humor, came a little hard, would open his eyes and spread his hands. This amused Dryer, who was easily amused. Martha toyed with a teaspoon, now and then touching a glass with it and extinguishing the vibration with a cold finger. In the course of that month, she and Franz had investigated several new methods, and as before, she spoke of this or that procedure with such austere simplicity that Franz felt no fear, no discomfort, for a strange rearrangement of emotions was taking place in him. Dryer divided in two. There was the dangerous, irksome Dryer, who walked, spoke, tormented him, guffawed, and there was a second, purely schematic Dryer, who had become detached from the first, a stylized playing card, a heraldic design, and it was this that had to be destroyed. Whatever method of annihilation was mentioned, it applied precisely to this schematic image. This Dryer number 2 was very convenient to manipulate. He was two-dimensional and immobile. He resembled those photographs of close relatives cut out along the outline of the figure and reinforced with cardboard that people found of cheap effects placed on their desks. Franz was not conscious of the special substance and stylized appearance of this inanimate personage, and therefore did not pause to wonder why these sinister discussions were so easy and harmless. Actually, Martha had spoken of two different individuals. Martha's subject was definitely loud, intolerably vigorous and vivacious. He threatened her with a priapus that had already once inflicted upon her a most mortal wound. smoothed his obscene mustache with a little silver brush, snored at night with triumphant reverberations, while Franz's man was lifeless and flat and could be burned or taken apart or simply thrown away like a torn photograph. This elusive germination had already begun when Martha rejected poisoning as an attempt on human life with inadequate means, a bit of subtle legality treated extensively at the long-suffering encyclopedia, and as something incompatible with matter-of-fact modern wars. She began talking of firearms. Her chilly rationality, combined, alas, with clumsy ignorance, produced rather weird results, subliminally mustering recruits for the remotest regions of her memory, unknowingly recalling the details of elaborate and nonsensical shootings described in trashy novelettes, and thereby plagiarizing villainy, an act which, after all, had been avoided only by Cain. Martha proposed the following. First, Franz would acquire a revolver, and then, by the way, I know how to shoot, Franz interjected. Fine, that helped. Though you know, darling, you still ought to practice a little somewhere in a quiet lane. The plan was this. She would keep Dreyer downstairs until midnight. How you managed that? Don't interrupt, Franz. A woman knows how. At midnight, while Dreyer was celebrating her sudden submissiveness with champagne, she would go to the window of the next room, draw back the curtain, and stand there for a while with a sparkling flute glass in her raised hand. That would be the signal. From his post near the garden fence, Franz would clearly see where, within the fire-bright rectangle, she would leave the window open and rejoin Dreyer on the parlor divan. He would probably be sitting, his clothes in disarray, drinking champagne and eating chocolates. Franz would immediately vault the gate in the dark. It's easy to do, of course there are some iron spikes on it, but you're such a fine athlete. And quickly crossing the garden on tiptoe so as not to leave any telltale foot traces, would enter to the French window she would have left ajar. The door to the parlor would be open. From its threshold he would fire half a dozen times in quick succession, as they do in American movies. For appearance's sake, before finishing, he would take the dead saloon-keeper's wallet, and perhaps the 2 ancient French silver candlesticks from the mantelpiece. Then he would go the way he had come. Meanwhile, she would run upstairs, undress, and go to bed, and that was all. Franz nodded. Another way was as followed. She would go to the country alone with Dreyer. The two of them would go for a good tramp. He loved walking. She and Franz would have chosen beforehand a nice lonely spot in the woods, said Franz, picturing to himself a dark grove of pines and oaks, and the old dungeon in his wooded hill, where kobolds had haunted his childhood. He would be waiting behind the tree with the reloaded revolver. When they had again killed him, Franz would shoot her through the hand. Yes, that's necessary, darling. It is always done. It must look as if we have been attacked by robbers. Franz would again take the wallet, which he could return to her later with the candlesticks. Franz nodded. These 2 projects were the basic ones. The others were merely variations on the theme. Believing, with so many novelists, that if the details were correct, the plot and the characters would take care of themselves, Martha carefully worked out the theme of the burglarized villa and that of the forest robbery. The 2, unfortunately, tended rather to get mixed up. Here Franz turned out to have an unexpected and most fortunate gift. He could imagine with diagrammatic clarity his movements and those of Martha's, and coordinate them in advance with those concepts of time, space, and matter which had to be taken into account. In this lucid and flexible pattern, only one thing remained always stationary, but this fallacy went unnoticed by Martha. The blind spot was the victim. The victim showed no signs of life before being deprived of it. If anything, the corpse, which had to be moved and handled before burial, seemed more active than its biological predecessor. Franz's thoughts traveled around this fixed point with acrobatic agility. All the necessary movements in their sequence were admirably calculated. The thing Dreyer at the present time would differ from the future Dreyer, only inasmuch as a vertical line differs from a horizontal. A difference of angle and perspective, nothing more. Martha unwittingly encouraged Franz in those abstractions because she always took for granted that Dreyer would be caught unawares and would have no time to defend himself. For the rest, she imagined quite vividly and realistically how he would raise his eyebrows on seeing his nephew point a pistol at him, how he would begin to laugh assuming that the weapon was a toy, and how he would finish his laughter with another world. When, in order to abolish all risk, she placed Dreyer in the position of a piece of merchandise packaged, tied up, and ready to be delivered, she did not realize how much easier this made things for Franz. Smart boy, she would laugh, kissing him on the cheek. Bright, bright darling. Reacting to her praise, he presented a kind of estimate, which had to be burned afterwards, unfortunately. The number of paces from fence to window, the number of seconds needed to cover that distance, the distance from the window to the door, from the door to the armchair, into which Dreyer had been transferred from the couch at a certain point in their planning, and for the revolver hanging as if it were in mid-air to the back of the conveniently placed head. And while Dreier was actually sitting in that armchair and reading the Sunday papers in a shaft of April sunlight, Martha with a glowing comb in her chignon, wearing a new pink tailor-made dress and coatless bronze, and Tom following them, a black ball in his jaws, would busily pace to and fro in the garden and along the wall of the villa, up the parlor window, and back again to the wicket, counting steps, memorizing them, rehearsing approaches and retreats, and Dreier, arms akimbo, would come out on to the terrace and presently join them in the garden, and help discuss his turn the new arrangement of flagged paths and flower beds that she and Franz were so diligently planning. They continued their planning when, alone in the drab, beloved little room, with the still unsold big-nippled girl above the bed and a brand-new expensive unwanted tennis racket in its frame, it was time to think of obtaining the weapon. As soon as they got to that stage, a ridiculous obstacle arose. They were both certain that a permit had to be obtained for the purchase of a revolver. Neither Martha nor Franz had the least idea how one obtained such a permit. They would have to make inquiries, go to the police maybe, and that might mean having to write and sign applications. It now became apparent that the acquisition of the tool was something many times bigger than the image of its use. Martha could not tolerate such a paradox. She eliminated it by seeking out insurmountable difficulties in the execution of the project as well. There was, for example, Gardner, who acted also as a bribable, druggable watchman, a level-headed, husky old rascal who had sharp eyes for intruders and squashed caterpillars, with a special juicy squeak and a special horrible twitch of iron-nailed finger and thumb which caused Franz, the first time he witnessed that green garret, to cry out like a girl. There was the policeman who frequently passed along the street as though strolling. Miscalculations and flaws also turned up in the forest plan. After an excursion to Grunwald, Franz reported that it contained more picnickers than pines. There were lots of other woods in the suburbs, but one had to find a way to get him to go there. And when the fulfillment of these projects receded to its proper place, the question of procuring the weapon no longer seemed so insoluble. There existed probably friendly gun dealers in the northern part of the city who did not bother about permits, and once the gun was there, surely chance was on their side and would place the target in the right position at the right moment. Thus Martha, satisfied in passing her innate sense of correct relationships, first things first, and if you want two noses, you should be content with one eye, were her favorite proverbs. So now the time came to obtain a small, dependable revolver. She imagined how Franz, slow, lanky, shy Franz, would make the rounds of gun shops, how the friendly salesman would suddenly start asking him tricky questions, how the idiot would remember later Franz's tortoise-shell glasses and the explanatory gestures of his thin, white, innocent hands, and how later, after the gun had been used and buried, some meddlesome detective would ferret all this out. Now if she should go and buy it, perhaps she thought Tom had rabies and she wanted to shoot him, and actually did some practicing. Women can also learn how to shoot well. And suddenly an extraneous image floated by and stopped, turned, and floated on like those cute objects that move by themselves in commercial cinema advertisements. She realized why the image of the revolver had in her mind such a definite form and color, though she knew nothing about guns. Willie's face emerged from the depth of her memory. He laughed his fat laugh and bent low, examining something and holding back Tom, who thought it was a plaything for him. She made another effort and remembered the Dreier was sitting at his desk and showing Willie what? A revolver. Willie had turned it in his hands, laughing, and the dog barked. She could remember nothing more, but that was sufficient, and she was amazed and gladdened to see how painstakingly and providently her mind had conserved for a couple of years that fleeting but absolutely indispensable image. It was yet another Sunday. Dreier and Tom went out for a little walk. All the windows in the villa were open. Sunlight had made itself comfortable in unexpected corners of the rooms. In the terrace, a breeze ruffled the pages of the April issue, already old, of a magazine with a photograph of the newly discovered really lovely arms of Venus. First of all, Martha thoroughly explored the desk drawers. Among blue folders containing documents, she found several sticks of gold-tinted sealing wax, a flashlight, 3 guldens, and 1 shilling, an exercise book with English words written in it, his grinning passport, who grins in official circumstances, a pipe broken that she had given him a long, long time ago, and an old little album of faded snapshots, a recent snapshot of a girl that might have been Isolde Ports, had she not worn a smart ski suit in the photo, a box of thumbtacks, pieces of string, a watch crystal, and other trivial junk, in the accumulation of which always infuriated Martha. Most of these articles, including the copybook and the winter sports advertisement, she deposited in the wastebasket She thrust back the drawers violently and, leaving the deafened desk, went up to the bedroom. There she rummaged through 2 white chest of drawers, finding among other things a hard ball that bore Tom's tooth marks, which God knows how had got into the drawer where her husband's 10 pairs of shoes stood in 2 neat rows. She threw the ball out of the window. She ran downstairs, and passing by a mirror, she noticed that the powder had come off her nose and her eyes were positively haggard. Should she see a lung doctor or a heart specialist, or both? She inspected a few more drawers in various rooms, chiding herself for looking at absurd places, and finally decided that the gun was either in the safe to which she did not have a key, the will was there, the treasure, the future, or else at the office. She tried the accursed desk again. It cringed and stood holding its breath at her menacing approach. The drawers began clacking like slaps on the face. Not here, not here, not here. She noticed a brown briefcase and was. She lifted it angrily. Beneath it, she saw deep in the drawer a small revolver with a mother-of-pearl candle. Simultaneously, her husband's voice came from nearby, and pushing the briefcase back, she quickly closed the drawer. "Heavenly day," Dryer was saying in a sing-song voice, almost like summer. Morosely, without turning, she said, "I'm looking for some pills. You had some pyramidon in your desk. My head is splitting." "I don't know. Nobody's head should split on such a lovely day." He seated himself on the leather arm of a chair and wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "You know what, my love," he said. "I've got an idea. Listen, what's Franz's telephone number? I'll call him up. We'll all drive to the tennis club. Good idea? Charming idea? When do you want to lunch? He's coming for lunch. Why don't you bring somebody else and play after lunch? It's only 10 now. We can lunch at 1:30. It's a shame to waste such weather. You come too, okay? Okay? Okay?" She considered to come only because she knew how unbearable it would be for Franz to be with him alone. "I'll call him," she said. The landlord asked who she was and why she wanted to talk to his lodger, but Martha told him to mind his own business. Franz, taken by surprise, arrived in an ordinary suit, having simply changed his sneakers. Dryer, puffing with impatience and afraid that any moment a thunderhead might form in the sky, rushed him upstairs and issued him a pair of white flannel pants, which he had bought in London a couple of years ago and which were too tight for him. Standing there, arms akimbo, eyes bulging, head cocked, he watched as Franz changed. The poor boy stank like a goat. All those long drawers on a day like this. Whoever sewed on that monogram was not a professional, at least not a professional seamstress. Franz, numbed with embarrassment, was well aware that his underwear was not what it should be, and grotesquely fearful that something about the whole situation might give away the messy secrets of adultery, had trouble with the changing of trousers as he stepped from foot to foot, hopping and extending one leg, and trying to persuade himself that it was only a bad dream. Dryer, too, began stepping from one foot to the other. The awfulness dragged on. The trousers seemed too long and too voluminous, and in the course of the sack race, a spasmodic movement landed Franz on top of a broken luggage rack which had no business to be in the dressing room. Dryer made vague motions as if he wanted to help, no less nightmarish than the business of buttoning the dummy's fly, which he was told to do himself, after which the fitter, the 2 fingers delicately pulled up the waist, adjusted the side straps, expertly slipped a belt around the wooden waist, and sank on one knee to measure the leg with tape which he wore as one does a dancing serpent. Finally, he gave a chuckle of relief and approval, and dealt Franz a robust slap on the buttocks. The blow kept vibrating for a quite long time in the poor fellow's system, whereas his double squeamishly advanced on bent legs tucking at his bottom. The tinkle endured even in the taxi. When they got out, Dryer gave him another exuberant slap, this time with Franz's racket, which he was about to forget in the cab. "A bare lost dot," said Martha to her vulgar husband. On the terracotta courts, the white figures darted to and fro, while hired children picked up balls at top speed. All around, a tall wire fencing was hung with creaking tarpaulin. White tables and wicker armchairs stood in front of the clubhouse. Everything was clean and sharply defined. Martha fell into conversation with a blonde-legged, beautiful, pale-eyed woman in a white skirt no bigger than a paper lampshade. They ordered drinks, an ice-cold American coffee-dark concoction. Dryer went inside to change. Dark Martha, the platinum lady, spoke loudly, but Franz did not catch a single word. A stray ball bounced past him, onto a table, onto a chair, onto the turf. He picked it up and examined it. It was quite new, and signed in violet by a firm well represented at the dandy. Franz put the ball on the table. 2 other young women went by with bare arms and legs, putting the red soles of their silk-laced white shoes, Mercury, no love set, down on the white flat as if walking barefoot. Their eyes were happy, their mouths red. All that was in the past, dreams and desires of a boyhood long gone. They blinded him with a blended smile, mistaking him for somebody. Besides, one of the further courts of kind of judge, a guardian of games, sat on a step-ladder of a chair, watching the ball cross the net, and like an autumn maiden, shaking his head in rhythm denying, they are not for you. In the black aperture of the door opened a dazzling white Dryer. "Let's go," he cried, and with a bouncing step, a fluffy towel around his neck, 2 rackets under his arm, and a box of new balls in his hand, headed for the court number 6. Martha said au revoir to the lady and moved to another chair to watch the 2 players. On the court, with the thoroughness of an executioner preparing to the block, Dryer was already measuring the height of the net with his racket. Franz stood on the side of the court near his mistress, looking up at a passing airplane. With a stern tenderness she took note of his dear boyish neck, his shining glasses, his elegant tennis trousers, which were a bit too roomy around the hips, but otherwise very becoming. Having completed his sinister manipulations, Dryer jogged heavily to the space line. Franz remained standing in the center of his own rectangle. A scrawny little girl with a blank expression on her freckled face bounced toward him one of the balls from the box. As the ball jumped, it struck him in the groin, and he tried to pat it down with his racket, but it passed between his legs, and she threw him another, which eluded him too. This time, however, he ran after it, and finally picked it up from under the feet of the player at adjacent court, who muffled his shot and glared at him. Successful, Franz ran back with a pocketed ball and assumed his former position. With a tolerant grin, Dryer waved at him to stand further back and ladled out a warm-up underhand serve in tolerably correct style, copied from that of the club coach, Count Zubov. Franz swung at it, and with beginner's luck returned it by means of tremendous, though unorthodox, whack that propelled the ball well beyond Dryer's reach. Martha could not refrain from applauding. Dryer dealt out another underhand serve. Franz's weapon swished mightily, but the ball flew by unscathed and was neatly fielded by the little girl behind him. Then, taking his time, Franz held the ball found in his pocket at arm's length, gauged the altitude, dropped the ball, and attempted to hit it on the rebound. Again, nothing happened except that he stepped on the ball and nearly fell. He trotted to the net where the ball had finally gotten entangled. Dryer told him to go well back and continued to send in ball after ball. Franz lunged and whirled, but his main stroke remained in swing and void. The little girl, who was beginning to enjoy herself, kept flitting this way and that, cupping every ball in her tiny hands with the nonchalant precision of rolling it or tossing it back to Dryer. "Stop getting in the way," cried Martha to the impudent little catcher, but the child did not hear or did not understand. She had a brass ring on her finger. It might be a dirty little gypsy or something. The ordeal continued. Finally, Franz, in the ecstasy of despair, did get a crack at the ball and soared over the roof of the pavilion. Dryer slowly walked up to the net and began to Franz. "Have I won?" asked Franz, panting. "No," said Dryer. "I just want to explain something. We are not playing American baseball or English cricket. This is a game called lawn tennis because it was first played on a grass." He invariably pronounced lawn as if rhymed with down. Then, slowly and sadly, Dryer returned to his baseline, and the same thing began all over again. Martha could bear it no longer. She shouted from where she sat, "Enough, enough! You see perfectly well he can't." She had wanted to shout, "Can't play," but a gust of spring wind cut off the ultimate word. Franz intently examined the strings of his racket. A young fellow, also lanky and also wearing glasses, who had been watching the play with predatory irony, stepped forward and bowed, and Dryer, indicating with his racket to Franz that he could go, joyfully greeted the newcomer, whom he knew to be a strong player. Franz walked over to Martha and sat down beside her. His face was pale and drawn, glistened with sweat. She was smiling at him, but he wiped his glasses and did not look her way. "Dear," she whispered, trying to catch his eye. She caught it, but he shook his head gloomily, his teeth clenched. "Everything is all right," she said softly. "It won't happen again. I'll tell you something," she added still more softly. "Listen, I found it." His gaze slipped away, but she firmly recaptured it. "I found it in the desk. You'll simply take it the day before, understand?" He blinked. "You'll catch cold like that," she said. "There's a bad wind blowing. Put on your sweater and coat, darling." "Not so loud," whispered Franz. "Please." She smiled and looked around and shrugged. "I must explain to you. Now listen, Franz, I have a completely new plan." Dryer just made a good shot, gently slicing the ball close to the net, and glanced from under his brows at his wife, pleased that she was looking at him. "You know what?" whispered Martha. "Let's go. I must explain everything to you." Dryer missed a volley and returned to his baseline, shaking his head. Martha called him over. She told him that her headache was worse and that he would not be late for lunch. Dryer nodded and went on with the game. They could not find a taxi, but anyway, it was only a few minutes of fast walking. They cut across a park where happy lovers were melting in each other's arms on yesteryear's dry leaves. She began explaining on the way. The plan was delightfully innocent. It was based on his study of English. Occasionally he would ask her to dictate something to him. She knew fewer words than he, but her pronunciation was perhaps a little better than his, or at least different from his. Her lawn, for example, rhymed with own and not down, which was ridiculous, as she had told him many times, the obstinate fool. He used to take down dictation in an exercise book. Then he would compare what he had written with text. It was on such dictation that everlasting happiness in a private park would depend. They would take a Tauchnitz novel and find a suitable sentence in it, such as, "I could not have acted otherwise," or "I am shooting myself because I am tired of life." The rest was clear. "In your presence," she said, "I shall dictate to him the chosen sentence. Of course, he must write it, not in a copybook, but on a clean sheet of letter paper. In fact, I have already destroyed that copybook. As soon as he has written that down, but just before he has lifted his head, you'll come up to him very close and a little behind him, as if you wanted to look over his shoulder, and then very carefully—" 10. Almost 3 months had already elapsed since that unforgettable day when the inventor, by now capitalized in Dreyer's mind, had produced the first samples of auto-mannequins, as he called them. Because of the strong, naked lighting, his workshop resembled a medical laboratory, and indeed it had been exactly that in the past. Demonstrations were conducted in a large bare room that had been once a repository for dead bodies and parts of such bodies, which ribald students, some of them, though not all, respectable old surgeons today, frequently used to place in various attitudes and reciprocal positions suggestive